Thanksgiving used to mean something. It used to be the one time I felt like I could pretend we were a normal family. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the turkey that Mom always overcooked. It was all chaotic and imperfect, but it was ours. I would set my alarm for 6 a.m. to help her in the kitchen, even if she never asked. I brought my own apron, I brought pie, I brought stories, I brought love. This year, I brought nothing because I wasn't invited. The message came through my brother Ryan. Not a call, not even a voice note, just a text. Hey, don't come this year. Mom and Dad said there's no place for losers at the table. Loser. That word scorched across my phone screen like fire. I stared at it for a full minute, wondering if it was a sick joke. Maybe it was autocorrect. Maybe he meant loner. That would have hurt less. But no, it was deliberate, cruel. And the worst part? He meant it. They all did. I typed back a simple, "Thanks for confirming." Then I silenced my phone, threw it across the couch, and sat there, breathing, trembling, remembering. It wasn't always like this. I used to be their golden child. Straight A's, scholarships, the first in the family to go to college. I made them proud until I made the mistake of choosing my own path. When I got pregnant with Nora and the father disappeared, everything changed. I went from the shining daughter to the family's burden, the disappointment, the charity case. I tried to patch things up over the years. I showed up, I brought gifts, I brought Nora. I watched them spoil Ryan's kids while barely acknowledging mine. I watched them post family pictures on Facebook that I wasn't in. I watched them toast to the children who make us proud and never once look at me. But Thanksgiving, that one day, was always neutral ground. Until now. Nora saw me crying that night. She's only 7, but she's sharp. Are we not going to Grandma's house this year? I forced a smile. No, sweetie, we're going to have our own special dinner at home, just you and me. Her little face fell for a second. Then she said, "Can I pick the dessert?" "Anything you want." She chose strawberry cake with pink icing and sprinkles. I've never baked one in my life, but I stayed up till 2 a.m., making sure it looked like something a unicorn would eat. Thanksgiving morning arrived. No calls, no texts, just silence. And yet, I smiled. I danced in the kitchen with Nora. We made mashed potatoes, sweet corn, grilled chicken, and that ridiculously pink cake. We lit candles, we wore dresses. We set the table for 2. Just as we sat down, my phone buzzed. It was a group photo from my mother. Everyone smiling around the table. Ryan was carving the turkey. His kids had party hats. My parents looked so happy. And there, in the corner of the photo, an empty chair, where I used to sit. That's when something in me shifted. I stared at that picture, and I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt calm, cold, determined. Because if there's no place for losers in their house, I would make sure there was no place for them in my life. And that was the beginning. I tucked my phone under a pillow and reached for Nora's hand. "Do you want to say what you're thankful for?" I asked softly. She nodded. "I'm thankful for you, Mommy, and for the cake." I smiled and blinked back tears. "I'm thankful for you too, baby. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." We ate slowly, savoring each bite like it mattered more than the last. Outside, the world was cold and gray, but inside our apartment, it felt warm, full, honest. No fake smiles, no passive-aggressive remarks, just us. After dinner, I sat on the couch while Nora played with her dolls. I stared at that family photo again. That empty chair kept haunting me. And then I noticed something. In the background of the photo, the dining room wall. My childhood painting still hung there, the one I made in 4th grade. They had erased me from the table, but still displayed my art like I was a trophy on the wall. It stung, I opened my old email, the one I hadn't touched in years, where I used to save dreams. Drafts titled Business Ideas, Someday Plans, Start Over. One of them was called Sunflower Place. It was an idea I had when I was pregnant with Nora. A cafe that doubled as a support space for single mothers. A warm, vibrant place filled with comfort food, free childcare hours, and shelves of donated clothes. Back then, I didn't have the money. I barely had rent. But I had something now that I didn't before: clarity. I wasn't going to beg for space in a family that saw me as disposable. I was going to build something so bright, they'd have to squint just to look at it. I pulled out my laptop. I started researching small business grants. I looked up kitchen rentals. I scrolled listings for old buildings in my neighborhood that no one wanted anymore. Nora leaned over and saw what I was doing. "Are you making a cake shop?" she asked. I smiled. "Kind of. It's going to be a place for moms who don't have anyone else." "Like you?" she said. I nodded. Exactly like me. And just like that, I stopped feeling sorry. I stopped wondering why they didn't love me the way I needed. I stopped wishing to be part of their world, because I was building a new one where no one would ever call my daughter a burden, one where no little girl would feel like an extra in her own family. That night, I created a vision board. I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing a proposal. My hands shook, but my heart didn't. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them. I was doing it to finally stop waiting for a seat at their table. Because I was building my own table now, and I knew exactly who I'd invite. It took 3 months of chaos, 3 months of balancing cupcakes and Nora's tantrums, paperwork and frozen waffles, grant applications and scraped knees. But when the city approved my proposal and a nonprofit offered startup support for women entrepreneurs, something shifted in my chest. The old bakery down on River Street had been abandoned for years. The windows were cracked. The inside smelled of flour and forgotten dreams. But I saw something there. Not just what it was, but what it could be. Sunflower Place was born not from rage, but from resilience. I painted the walls sunflower yellow with Nora. We pressed our handprints near the entrance. I posted flyers around the community. Hot meals, warm smiles, mom's welcome. Every mother who walked in looked like I used to. Tired, invisible, trying to keep it together. And every time one of them said, "Thank you," something inside me healed a little more. The word spread fast. A local reporter ran a story on us. "Single mom creates space of hope after family rejection." When the article went viral, I got a call from a local councilwoman. She donated shelves of children's books. A bakery chain sent us supplies. A woman in Texas, whom I'd never met, mailed me $500 with a note. "For your daughter. And for every girl like her." Meanwhile, silence from my family. Not even a call, not even a fake apology. Until April. It was my mother's birthday. The same mother who didn't save me a chair at Thanksgiving. The same mother who said, "You know your brother has a real job." That day, they threw a massive party at a private venue. Red carpet, champagne tower, custom cake. All over Facebook, my brother posted photos. One with the caption, "Surround yourself with winners only." And there, in the corner of one photo, I saw it, Nora's old drawing, the one I'd made into a postcard for Sunflower Place's launch. It was pinned to the venue's flower wall. They had used our logo as decor. The audacity. They didn't invite me, again. But they were using my daughter's art. The daughter, they said, didn't belong at their table. I stared at the image, seething. Nora peeked over my shoulder. "That's mine," she whispered, pointing. "Yes, it is," I said, my voice firm. "And they don't get to claim it." I didn't scream. I didn't comment. I acted. The next day I called my lawyer. The Sunflower Place logo was trademarked. And the family venue that hosted the party? It turned out it had unpaid building violations. I sent an anonymous complaint, and I served a cease and desist letter to the venue and to my brother's PR firm, politely requesting they remove all branding tied to my business or face legal consequences. The fallout was swift. The venue had to take down the posts. My brother, trying to save face, issued a limp apology online, but the damage was done. A few mom bloggers caught wind of the story. Suddenly, people weren't praising his success. They were asking, is this the guy who mocked his own sister and stole her daughter's art? And still, not a word from my parents. Until the voicemail. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother's voice crackled. We didn't realize you were doing so well. We saw the news about the cafe, and your little girl, she's grown. We'd love to reconnect. Maybe for Mother's Day." Mother's Day. After all this time, now she remembered I was a daughter. I didn't delete the voicemail. I played it back once and smiled, because for the first time, I had no desire to respond. I looked at Nora coloring by the window, sunlight warming her curls. She was safe. She was seen. And I had built a world where we didn't need a seat at their table. We had created our own kingdom. That night, as I closed up the cafe, a woman lingered by the door. She had gray streaks in her braids and tears in her eyes. "I read about you," she said. "My daughter's in a shelter right now. Could she come here?" I unlocked the door again. "Always." By morning, 3 more moms were waiting outside. One with a baby in a stroller, one with a black eye she didn't explain, one holding nothing but hope. I made coffee. Nora passed out muffins. And as I watched these women settle into safety, I realized something. They didn't need to know my story. They felt it. Every crack in our old walls was filled with the silence I once choked on. Every cushion on the reading bench held the weight of years I'd spent invisible. Every hug was the one I never got from my mother. I didn't build Sunflower Place to get revenge, but somehow, healing was revenge. One afternoon, I heard Nora laugh, that deep, belly laugh that kids only make when they know they're loved, and I thought, if my parents walked in right now, I'd still say no. Not because I hated them, but because I finally loved myself more. They had abandoned me for being a burden. Now people were calling me a blessing. They left me to struggle. Now I had a wait list. They skipped my Thanksgiving. Now strangers were inviting me to theirs. And just when I thought I had closure, a letter came. From my father. It was short, handwritten, no return address. "We were wrong. Your brother's business failed. We lost everything. Can we stay with you? Just for a little while?" I stared at the envelope. Then, without a word, I tossed it into the fireplace. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means locking it gently and walking away with peace. Winter set in early that year. Snow crept along the windowsills of Sunflower Place, and the kettle stayed hot all day. Nora had started drawing turkeys on every blank page she could find, excitedly asking, "Are we gonna have Thanksgiving here?" I hesitated. The last Thanksgiving I remembered, I was alone, eating boxed stuffing while my parents sent photos of the real family gathering. My brother grinning, my parents toasting, their table overflowing. But I didn't want my daughter's memories poisoned like mine. So I nodded. "Yes, but our version?" That week, the women in the shelter transformed the place. They made paper garlands, stringing affirmations instead of fall leaves. One of them found an old recipe book in the basement and cried, making her mother's sweet potato casserole. Another made name cards from cardboard scraps and nail polish. We didn't have crystal glasses or linen napkins, but we had laughter, warmth, and a table full of survivors. Then, on Thanksgiving morning, something happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside. I recognized it immediately. My brothers. 2 shadows climbed out. My parents. I froze at the window. Nora peeked around me, whispering, "Who's that?" I didn't answer. I walked out calmly, arms folded as they approached the door like it was theirs to open. My mother forced a smile. "We were in town. We thought maybe we could drop by." "For the losers' dinner?" I asked. They winced. "We were wrong," my dad said, clearing his throat. "Your brother, well, he's going through some financial troubles. He's selling the house." My mother added, "We didn't know where else to go." I stepped aside, letting them glimpse the glowing interior. Candles, laughter, a carved turkey, women hugging, children giggling. A life they never believed I could build. "You told me I had no place," I said softly. "And you were right. Not at your table." I turned to go, but Nora tugged my sleeve. "Mom, who are they?" I knelt beside her. "They're people from the past." And then I stood up, taller than I'd ever felt, and closed the door behind me. Not with anger, with peace. Inside, we passed around gratitude cards. And when it came to my turn, I looked around at these women, these survivors, and said, "I'm thankful they left me out because it gave me the space to build something better." That night, while my parents sat in their car outside, wondering why no one answered the door, we carved our own story, one where losers became leaders, where rejection became refuge, and where silence was replaced with songs and second chances. As the door clicked shut behind me, a strange stillness settled in my chest. Not emptiness, not anger, just peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging for love that costs too much. Inside, the warmth hit me all at once. Nora ran off to help one of the women frost cupcakes with the mashed sweet potatoes, and the others resumed a game of gratitude charades someone had made up. Laughter echoed through the old building like sunlight after a storm. One of the older women, Margie, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah, better than okay." "You don't owe them anything," she whispered. "Not even an explanation." I exhaled slowly. "I know." Still, I glanced back at the frosted window, watching the blurry silhouette of my parents arguing outside their car. My brother was pacing. My mom had her phone out, no doubt trying to call. But I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who'd drop everything to chase their approval. That girl had built a home, without them. Margie chuckled. "You should be proud of this place. I've never seen a Thanksgiving like this in my whole life." I smiled. "Me either." Later that evening, as the candles flickered low and the last of the pie was passed around, one of the younger girls, maybe 16, spoke up. "Can we do this every year?" Everyone turned to me. "Yeah," I said, surprised by how easily the word came. "We'll make our own tradition, a real one." We named it the Leftovers Feast, not because the food was secondhand, but because we were the ones left behind. And somehow, together, we'd become something whole. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed once more. This time a message from my dad. "Come outside, we need to talk. We made a mistake." I showed Margie the message. She raised an eyebrow. "You gonna go?" I shook my head and quietly deleted it. "Number, let them sit with their mistake. I've got better company." Nora came running up to me with a paper crown made from foil and said, "You're the queen of Thanksgiving now." Everyone clapped. And in that moment, surrounded by women who had nothing left to lose but found everything in each other, I knew. They didn't break me. They freed me. I looked down at my daughter, beaming up at me, and whispered, "We made it." Outside, the SUV eventually drove away. But inside, we stayed, we laughed, we lived. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the shelter's kitchen, catching the steam rising from freshly brewed coffee. I stood at the counter in my borrowed flannel robe, watching Nora play with a toddler whose mom had fled just 2 nights ago. The hum of safety had replaced the chaos I once called family. But even peace, I was learning, comes with new battles. Because by noon, my inbox was flooded. My mom had sent a long email titled, "Let's talk before you do something dramatic." My brother, ever the golden child, messaged, "You made your point. Come home now before things get worse." And then a voicemail from Dad. His voice clipped tight. "We didn't mean what we said about Nora. We were upset. You're taking this too far. Family's family. You can't cut us out forever." I stared at the screen. For a moment, I wavered. Years of conditioning whispered, "Be the bigger person. Apologize. Keep the peace." But then I looked around. Peace was already here. It was Nora giggling with a plastic spoon. It was the woman next to me in the kitchen who'd been beaten into silence, now singing softly while stirring stew. It was the elderly woman in the corner, sewing patches onto donated coats with careful, trembling hands. Peace wasn't silence. It was freedom from begging to be loved. Still, I replied to my parents with a package. Inside, I placed a copy of the deed to the house they tried to gift my brother. I'd bought it at auction under a holding company. A printout of the trust fund I'd established for Nora. All the money they assumed would go to my brother. And lastly, a letter in my daughter's handwriting. "Thank you for calling me names. Now Mommy built a place where kids like me get called beautiful instead." I didn't include my name. They'd know. Later that week, as word of the Sunflower home spread, first local news, then a national spotlight, we started getting calls. Not from my parents, but from mothers, grandmothers, runaways, nurses, teachers, people who'd lived through Thanksgivings like mine. I was invited to speak at a conference on trauma and recovery. The organizers were shocked I'd created a full shelter with therapy, childcare, legal help, and transitional housing in just under a year. "Where'd you get the idea?" a journalist asked. I smiled. "From a dinner table where my child was called ugly." Silence, then applause. After the conference, I stepped off stage into a small hallway lined with volunteers and reporters. A teenage girl approached me, barely 16, clutching a wrinkled flyer we distributed months ago. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "My mom said I was too ugly to be loved," she whispered. "But when I saw what you built, I thought maybe I wasn't broken." I hugged her tight. That moment meant more than any apology my parents could offer, because redemption wasn't in their hands, it was in mine, and I had chosen to give it to others instead. Back at the shelter, I found Nora curled up with a book on the beanbag chair. She looked up, her smile the purest kind of peace. No fear, no self-doubt, just light. "Mama," she said, "did you always know I was beautiful?" I knelt beside her, brushing hair from her cheek. "I always knew, baby. The world just took a while to catch up." Later that night, I received a call from the same aunt who once ignored me at every holiday. "I saw the news," she said, hesitant. "Your shelter? It's incredible. I'm sorry I wasn't there when it mattered." I didn't respond with bitterness. I didn't need to. Because for once, silence was power, not pain. The very next morning, a silver SUV pulled up outside the shelter. Not the sleek, smug one from months ago, but another. Black-tinted windows, nervous energy. The door opened. My parents stepped out. They looked older, tired, smaller somehow. My father held a folder in his hand. My mother clutched a photo of me and Nora, from a news article, I assumed. "We came to apologize," Dad started, but I stopped them. The weeks after my mother's visit were oddly quiet. No more dramatic calls, no more backhanded messages from my brother, no surprise papers. It was as if they'd finally accepted that I was gone, or worse, realized I'd become someone they couldn't manipulate anymore. The shelter grew, not just in size, though we did expand into the old bakery across the street, but in soul. Women brought their children. Teenagers who had nowhere to go came with guitars and stories and broken dreams. And one by one, they started to rebuild. We started calling it the hearth. Not a shelter, not a project. A hearth, because people found warmth there. Then one morning, Nora handed me a crumpled flyer she'd pulled from the mailbox. It was for a Thanksgiving banquet, the one hosted every year by my parents. Except this year, something was off. At the bottom, scrawled in hand, was a line. All family welcome, no matter the past. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach twisted. Was it a trap? A guilt tactic? Or maybe something else? Nora was watching me. She didn't say anything, just took my hand. "You don't have to go," she said. "We can make our own pie." God, she sounded so grown. But I nodded. "Let's make our own Thanksgiving," I said. We did. We cooked too much food, laughed until our cheeks hurt. Half the community joined us. Everyone brought something. A memory, a scar, a new recipe. And then someone knocked. It was raining lightly outside. When I opened the door, it was my father. No umbrella, no coat. He looked like a man who had just discovered the world was not built for him to command. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. I stepped outside. Nora stayed behind, watching from the window. He fumbled with something in his coat, pulled out an old family photo, one where I had been cropped out. He showed it to me like an offering. "I looked at this yesterday," he said, voice brittle, "and realized we've been missing someone this whole time." I didn't speak. "I was wrong," he added. "So wrong. And I don't know if I deserve to ask, but could I meet your daughter again?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "You met her once. You called her unwanted. She doesn't forget words like that. Neither do I." He exhaled. Maybe he expected forgiveness. Maybe he wanted it to be a movie ending. But I shook my head. "You're welcome to stay for dinner," I said, "but only if you sit next to the kid you insulted and hear her story from her." His eyes widened. Then he nodded. He stepped inside and sat at the kid's table. Nora gave him a plate, said nothing, just watched him like a queen. For the first time, he didn't reach for the biggest slice. He asked, "May I?" And she shrugged. Sure. No one begged for their place that night. Everyone earned it. And it hit me. This was the real inheritance. The one they could never give me because they never had it. He sat stiffly at that tiny table. The same man who once demanded silence at family dinners now sat between two toddlers squabbling over crayons. He flinched when one accidentally knocked over a cup of juice near him. He didn't yell. He just blinked, like he was in another world. And maybe he was. I watched it unfold from the kitchen doorway, my arms folded, heart armored. This wasn't revenge. This was reckoning. Across the room, the women who'd found shelter in the hearth watched too. They knew who he was, not by name, but by pattern. Men like him had bruised more than skin. They had bruised souls. Nora stood up from her chair, carried over a slice of her own pie. Her invention, apple cinnamon with crushed graham cracker crust. She placed it in front of him gently. "My mom doesn't let just anyone eat this," she said. "So, don't waste it." He looked at her. That same girl he once called a burden. His lip trembled. "Thank you." She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just nodded and walked back. And something in me broke. Not with sadness, but pride so heavy it brought tears. I returned to the table, sat across from him. "You thought money was the inheritance," I whispered. But that house you kept, the land you passed on to my brother, it's crumbling, emotionally and literally. He looked up sharply. You didn't know? I leaned forward. Your golden son took a second mortgage on it. Used it to fund his startup. It's been foreclosed. Auctioned. Bought. He swallowed hard. By who? By me. His face drained of all color. I rebuilt it, turned it into a trauma recovery retreat. The gates say entry by respect only. So far you haven't qualified. He put his fork down, hands trembling. I didn't come for that, he whispered. Then why did you come? I asked. He was quiet. I guess I just didn't want to be forgotten. I stood up slowly. Too late. He didn't cry, but he deflated, like the realization of his irrelevance finally caught up with him. I walked away, back to Nora. She was showing another kid how to fold a napkin into a crown. And in that moment, I saw the cycle break. A little girl loved enough to grow roots where I had none. A table full of stories that had nothing to do with bloodlines. Only bravery. The Thanksgiving wasn't loud. There were no grand toast or golden turkeys. But it was ours. And sometimes healing doesn't sound like clapping. It sounds like silence. The kind that finally feels safe. A week after the Sunflower Center's soft opening, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. Crumpled, smudged, as if someone had changed their mind 5 times before finally mailing it. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother's. I heard what you built. Maybe it's time we talked. We're staying with Brandon temporarily. He lost his job. Dad's pension is frozen. Things aren't good. Call me if you want. That last part, if you want, stung. It was her way of pretending she hadn't ripped me out of the family tree like a weed. I tucked the letter in the drawer beside the tea bags and forgot about it. Until Nora saw it, she held it up. Is this from them? I nodded. She asked softly, do you want them to come here? I answered without hesitation. No. I didn't owe them a warm welcome. Not after all the cold Thanksgivings they'd given me. Still, a part of me wanted to see them face to face. Not to reconnect, but to remind them that the loser they discarded was now holding up families they never even noticed. That opportunity came faster than I expected. A local news anchor had heard about the Sunflower Center. She wanted to do a segment, Holiday Kindness, a woman turns her pain into shelter. The morning of the interview, I wore the same cranberry dress I'd worn the last time I'd tried to attend Thanksgiving with my family. The one my mother said looked cheap and clung to my desperation. Now, it looked like resilience. I was halfway through the interview when the anchor smiled. We've got a surprise for you. Some folks from your past showed up to say something. The camera panned, and there they were, my parents, my brother. All 3 standing awkwardly outside the glass doors, clutching a pie-like piece could be baked last minute. Brandon even wore the smug look I remembered from years ago. Until he saw the cameras. I stepped outside calmly. We thought maybe we could join the community dinner, my mother said, adjusting her pearls. You know, for old time's sake. I glanced behind me. At the line of single mothers, tired grandmas, runaway teens wrapped in scarves, waiting patiently with stories they weren't ready to share. You want to eat with them? I asked. Because this place isn't for people who only show up when they're hungry. My father shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know everything you were doing. We were wrong. Brandon cleared his throat. Look, things have changed. I got laid off. The house is in foreclosure. Mom and Dad are crashing with me. We thought maybe... I stopped him. Number you didn't think. You ignored, you dismissed, you mocked. And now you're here because the roof finally caved in, metaphorically and literally. But we're family, my mother pleaded. I turned slowly and opened the door. For them, I said, nodding at the people waiting in line. Not for you. The door shut behind me with a soft click. The camera kept rolling. And for once, I didn't flinch. Because the world finally saw what I had seen all along. Not a loser, but a survivor who built a kingdom from the scraps they left her. I walked back inside, heart steady, footsteps louder than I remembered. Each one echoed like justice in the hallway I had once cleaned alone, when they made me scrub floors instead of letting me sit at the adult table. Nora ran up to me and wrapped her little arms around my waist. Did they try to take you away again, Mama? I knelt down and looked her in the eye. No, sweetheart. This time they tried to take a seat at the table we built, but they forgot. It's not their table anymore. From across the lobby, one of the volunteers whispered, "Was that your family?" I nodded. Used to be. The segment aired that night. The footage of me shutting the door, followed by the applause from inside the Sunflower Center, went viral. People flooded our website with donations, messages, and even letters from other daughters who had once been called losers, too. The next morning, my mother's pie was still sitting on the front steps, untouched and already attracting flies. I let it rot. A week later, I got a call from the bank. My childhood home, the estate my brother once boasted about, had officially gone into foreclosure. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my tea and let the silence speak. Later, I bought that house at auction, anonymously. And on Thanksgiving the next year, I turned it into transitional housing for women leaving abusive families. I named it The Porch because it was where I had once been left out, and now it was where others would be welcomed in. I didn't take it, not yet, because healing isn't the same as forgetting. And forgiveness isn't the same as reopening the door to someone who nailed it shut on you. I sat in my office long after the guests had gone, the light from Ava's drawing still on the desk like a tiny lighthouse in a storm. The letter Daniel gave me sat unopened. I had stared at it for nearly 20 minutes. My fingers hovered above it, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of what it might say. Did I want an apology? Did I want closure? Or was this just another attempt to shift the burden back onto me? Like always. I finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper, written in my father's neat mechanical script. Olivia, I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know. I see it now. I see everything. The way you raised Ava. The way you never stopped fighting. The way you became the woman I never thought you could be. Because I never gave you the chance. You were always my daughter. I just wasn't much of a father. No. I'm sorry. No mention of the years he spent pretending I didn't exist. No acknowledgement of Ava, of how he insulted her, ignored her, and turned away when I needed him most. Just guilt. Just a final note from a man who had already lost everything. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I reached into the drawer, pulled out my own piece of paper, and began writing. Not to him, to a lawyer. I decided to permanently sever ties, not just emotionally, legally. No more loopholes, no more family claims. No way for him or anyone else to say they were entitled to anything I'd built. The next morning, I handed Ava a lunchbox and kissed her forehead. As I watched her walk into her new school, confident, joyful, free, I felt a surge of peace I hadn't known in years. Then I walked back to the Phoenix Nest, and outside posted on the bulletin board was a small note left anonymously. Thank you for making a home where broken girls can become whole women. I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle. I hadn't just escaped my past. I had rewritten it. And now there was only one thing left to do. At the next citywide event, I stood in front of a crowd of hundreds, press included, and announced a scholarship fund, named not after my parents, but after Ava, the Ava Rose Foundation for Daughters Who Were Never Chosen, for girls whose families called them unworthy, unwanted, unnecessary. Now, they'd have something with their name on it, something permanent, because if the past couldn't give us a legacy, we'd create one of our own. 2 weeks after the foundation launch, I received a letter with no return address. It was delivered by hand, by a woman in a gray suit who didn't say much, only that she was asked to deliver it discreetly. Inside was a legal document stamped with an estate seal I hadn't seen before. I froze. It was my grandfather's will, not my father's. I hadn't thought of him in years. He passed when I was in high school long before any of this current mess exploded. But as I read through the pages, my breath caught. My grandfather had left behind a trust, one that was meant for me, not for Daniel and not for my parents, me. The trust had been contingent on one thing, that I reach my 30th birthday having demonstrated personal resilience and charitable contribution to society. My grandfather hadn't believed in traditional wealth transfers. He believed in legacy. There was more. If Olivia is deemed to have fulfilled this clause, the estate totaling $4.2 million shall transfer to her, including the ancestral home. I blinked at the words. The home my father sold to cover his debt. The home my mother swore was never mine to inherit. I wasn't just getting it back. I was about to own it outright, with the authority to reclaim, repurpose, or demolish. A week later, I stood on its crumbling front steps, keys in my hand, watching as a surveyor walked the perimeter. "Ma'am," he said, "are you really going to tear it down? It's a beautiful estate, if a bit weathered." I smiled. It housed beautiful lies. It deserves a beautiful ending. And with that, I signed the papers. It would be bulldozed, not in anger, but in closure. Because sometimes the greatest power is in deciding what no longer deserves to stand. Word got around fast. My parents, panicked, sent me email after email. "You're being rash." "It's a family legacy. We thought it was gone." You can't just erase history. But I could, and I would. 3 days before demolition, they showed up unannounced at my office. My mother looked thinner, my father older. Their eyes carried a desperation I hadn't seen since the day they begged me not to speak at that gala. "We'll lose everything," my father said. "Why do you care now?" I asked. "You said I was never part of this family." "We were wrong," my mother whispered. "Too late," I replied. "But don't worry, I'm keeping something." They stared at me. "The fireplace mantle," I continued. "It's where I used to sit and read, the only place in that house that ever felt like mine." That was the day they realized. They didn't just lose a house, they lost a daughter who turned ashes into fire. On the morning of the demolition, a crowd began to gather outside the estate. Not because they came to mourn its loss, but because I invited them to witness it. Neighbors, journalists, survivors, donors, strangers who had followed the Phoenix Nest story from afar. The lawn, once meticulously trimmed by my mother's obsessive pride, now hosted folding chairs, camera crews, and a small podium. I stood at the mic in a fitted black coat, Ava by my side holding my hand tightly. Behind us, the house loomed in the background like a giant relic of broken promises. "I stand here today," I began, "not as a bitter daughter, but as a builder of better homes, better futures, and better endings." The crowd was silent. My parents raised me in a house that echoed with conditions. Conditions to be loved, conditions to be seen, conditions to be enough. I paused. Ava looked up at me with those warm, trusting eyes that had carried me through the darkest nights. "But I realized something. Brick by brick, we inherit more than walls. We inherit silence, shame, expectations. And today, I'm breaking that inheritance. There was a murmur among the crowd. Cameras clicked. Some of the guests began to cry. This home will be turned into something else, I continued. Not rubble, not revenge, a sanctuary. The screen behind me lit up with architectural renderings. The Phoenix House, a brand new transitional home for women and children, escaping abuse, family rejection, and generational harm. Built on the very site where I once wept alone behind bedroom doors. The design kept one element of the old house, the fireplace mantel, reclaimed, restored, and relocated to a new library space where children could sit, read, and feel safe, where warmth wasn't conditional. The applause erupted before I even stepped back. Reporters asked questions. Survivors came forward to hug me. One woman whispered, "I never thought I'd see someone take a broken past and turn it into a blueprint." Just as the bulldozer roared to life, I spotted them across the street. My parents, watching from behind a fence. My father's jaw clenched, my mother gripping his sleeve like she might cry. They didn't dare cross the line. I didn't wave, because this wasn't for them. This was for every child who was told they weren't worthy of love unless they bent themselves into silence. And just as the first wall came crashing down in a plume of dust, I looked at Ava and said, "This is where we start over." She smiled, and for the first time I didn't see a reflection of my pain in her eyes. I saw hope, pure, unshaken hope. Months passed. The demolition made headlines for days, but the silence afterward felt more important. It was the kind of silence I had begged for growing up. Not the cold kind my parents weaponized, but the soft, peaceful kind that follows truth. The Phoenix House broke ground in spring. Every brick laid felt like a heartbeat of redemption. We built rooms with wide windows, quiet corners, and open kitchens where no one was ever told they weren't welcome. The walls carried soft pastels, but their foundation held strength, designed by women, for women, funded by survivors who once sat where I had. The reclaimed fireplace mantel was installed in the reading lounge. I watched Ava sit by it on opening day, flipping through a picture book, feet swinging off the bench, sunlight spilling across her face. I didn't cry, I just smiled. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about resurrection. One evening, as I was locking up, I received a small brown envelope slipped through the front gate. No name, no stamp. Inside was a folded piece of paper in my father's handwriting. "You were always mine in name, but never in spirit. I see that now. What you built, what you are, was never from me. I hope one day you'll forgive me. But even if you don't, I'll carry this shame for the rest of my life." I stood beneath the porch light, rereading it until the ink blurred with tears I hadn't expected. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because his letter wasn't a key to my door. It was a eulogy for a version of him I had long buried. At the end of that week, the first mother and child moved into the Phoenix House. They arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and shadows in their eyes. I welcomed them personally, showed them the kitchen, the shared library, the warm beds. The little boy clung to his mother's leg until Ava walked over, took his hand, and said, "It's okay. It's safe here." That's when I knew. It wasn't just a revenge story anymore. It was a reclamation, a promise, a blueprint, a legacy of quiet power rising from the rubble of everything they tried to bury me under. And no matter what they left me out of, I made sure my daughter would never feel left behind. The following months were unlike anything I had expected. My face was featured in parenting magazines, my voice requested for podcasts and panels. But none of that compared to the quiet power of watching women walk through the doors of the porch, holding their babies with the same fear I once carried, and slowly replacing it with hope. I didn't create the porch to be famous. I created it because I never wanted another woman to sit alone on a holiday, wondering why she wasn't good enough for the people who were supposed to love her first. Word spread fast. My mother and brother heard everything. I didn't block their numbers. I let their messages pile up like dust in a room no one visits anymore. They started with cold silence, then turned to excuses. Your brother was drunk when he said that. He didn't mean it. We didn't know you were struggling that much. You should have told us. But they knew. They just didn't care. And now that the world did, now that I mattered in the eyes of strangers, they were scrambling for relevance in my life again. One day, I saw them standing outside the porch's gates. My mother clutched a gift bag like it held the apology she never voiced. My brother wore sunglasses like that could hide the shame. I didn't go out. Instead, I sent Nora, holding a handwritten note sealed in a sunflower envelope. She handed it to my mother without saying a word. I watched through the office window as my mother read the note. It said, "Thank you for not saving us. It taught me how to save others." She broke down, sobbing in the driveway. My brother tried to pretend he wasn't crying too. They stood there for a long time, but not once did I open the door, because healing doesn't require the people who broke you to say sorry. It just needs you to stop waiting for them. That night, I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner for 20 families at the porch. The laughter was loud, the stories were beautiful, and every chair was filled, even mine. The following Monday, I got a letter from my parents in the mail. Real paper, not a text, not an email. It was the first time they had written to me since I was a child. Inside were two things: a faded photo of me at age 5, sitting alone at the edge of a family picnic blanket, and a typed apology. Cold, formal, like a resignation letter masked as love. It read, "We didn't realize how far we pushed you until the world began clapping for the daughter we ignored." I folded the letter in half and placed it in a box labeled "Unsentimental Things," right between the cracked teacup from my childhood and my high school report card, the one they never looked at because my brother's science fair trophy was shining brighter. Nora saw the letter. "You're not going to respond?" I shook my head. That letter's not for me. It's for their guilt. Later that week, I was invited to a major charity gala, not as a guest, as the honoree. They called me the woman who rebuilt Thanksgiving, which made me laugh because I never thought a holiday full of tears could someday become a symbol of hope. As I walked onto the stage, in a dark green gown, I bought myself without a second thought. I felt a hand grab mine. It was my daughter. "Mom," she whispered, "you look like justice." I smiled. "No, baby, I look like a second chance." The room applauded, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the crowd someone whispered, "Isn't that the girl whose family left her out?" Number, I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who didn't just rewrite her story. I published it in bold ink with sunflower gold edges and no room for apologies. As I stood on stage, I dedicated the award not to my parents or my brother, but to the women who sat at kitchen tables counting change while their families dined in gold. To the ones who were called burdens, losers, invisible, I said, voice steady, "You are none of those things. You are the reason I built the porch." The standing ovation didn't matter. What mattered was that my daughter saw people rising for me, for us, for every forgotten child and single mother whose pain was turned into purpose. Back at the porch, I placed the award not in a case, but in the center of our communal dining table. A reminder that sometimes the things we lose, acceptance, family, even love, lead us to build something stronger. A family that chooses you every single day. Thanksgiving morning came again, 1 year after the night they left me out. The table at the porch was fuller than ever, not just with food, but with warmth. There were no place cards, no special seats. Every chair held someone who once felt unwanted. A teenage girl recently kicked out after coming out to her parents. An older man whose children stopped visiting. A mother and her 3 kids who had nowhere to go. This time, I had made room for all of them. Nora sat beside me, her little fingers curled around a spoon as she helped serve mashed potatoes to a woman named Diane, who once slept in her car with her infant. The front door opened. I turned, expecting another volunteer. But it was them, my parents, dressed too nicely as if this were some event, not a shelter. My brother trailed behind, hands in his pockets, guilt clinging to him like a heavy coat. My mother spoke first. "We heard what you built. We thought maybe we could join this year." There was no malice in her voice, just a hollow emptiness where pride should have lived. She looked at the warmth in the room and realized none of it was hers. My daughter looked at me, waiting. So I stood. "Mom, Dad, this table has no room for people who called my daughter names. No space for a brother who laughed when I begged for help." My brother stepped forward. "We were wrong." I nodded. "Yes, but this home wasn't built for apologies that come too late. It was built for healing. And unfortunately, you're not part of that journey." The room was silent, but not heavy. Peaceful. I guided them to the door. Before closing it, I handed my mother something, a photo. It was from last year's Thanksgiving. Nora, me, and 23 other strangers turned family, smiling, whole, unbroken. My mom looked down at it. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. I smiled softly. "I know, but that doesn't mean you get a seat." And I closed the door. Inside, Nora ran up and hugged me. "Is it okay that I don't miss them?" "It's more than okay," I said. "Because you're loved here." The oven timer beeped. Laughter returned. Plates clattered again. I walked back into the room, where people who were once forgotten were finally remembered, where the word Thanksgiving meant more than just turkey and pie. It meant reclaiming power, rewriting stories, and choosing who got to sit at your table. And that day, surrounded by the family I created, I finally understood. The best revenge isn't loud, it's peace.